Welcome to the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Brinkman, and today I'm going to be talking with Erin Carey. She is a functional nutritionist specializing in mental health, and she is the host of the podcast, Sparking Wholeness, and the owner of the coaching company, Sparking Wholeness. As a survivor of mental illness, Erin knows firsthand how suffering from chronic illness can infiltrate every area of your life. She has spent the last decade coaching others and learning for herself what holistic health truly means. And that comes in the form of nutrition for the mind, body, and soul. Erin wants people to be empowered to be their own health advocate and not be limited by a label or diagnosis. Here's a clip from today's show. Maybe some silver linings that maybe you experienced for struggling with bipolar depression.
I think for so long I operated under the mentality, pun intended, that my brain was broken, that my mental health was deteriorating, and that I had to take medication to boost whatever neurotransmitters were imbalanced, whatever chemicals were imbalanced. And that theory now, a good psychiatrist will tell you that theory is just a theory and doesn't necessarily incorporate what's going on with a brain that's suffering from depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder. It's way more complex than that. And when we call it a chemical imbalance, we're simplifying things because it's so much more complex than that. And maybe it doesn't have to do with one neurotransmitter, but I just thought, well, here it is. This is what's happening. And this is all I have to offer. And I limited myself with my diagnosis. I limited, in some ways, even my future and my potential, because I just thought that maybe I had to live in a smaller box than I originally wanted to live.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. Pendulum Probiotics is a powerhouse in gut wellness. Akkermansia, Metabolic Daily, and Glucose Control all contain Akkermansia, which is a key player in gut health. It fosters the growth of Akkermansia, aiding in digestion, nutrient absorption, immune resilience, and a positive impact in your overall well-being. If you're ready to experience Pendulum Probiotics, unlock an exclusive 20% discount on your first month's membership by entering my unique code when you click on the Linktree link in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on today, Erin. I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on. This is going to be fun.
Now, I'm a little bit familiar with you. Why don't you tell my listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I am, like you, I'm an integrative health coach, just got certified in applied functional medicine, and I'm also a survivor of, I'll say by the time I was 18, I was diagnosed with 3 different mental health diagnoses. The first one was PTSD, the second one was depression, and then I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I have been through quite a bit with coming to terms with what that looks like for me and understanding health in a holistic way. And I was medicated for all of these diagnoses for a total of 18 years. And I have been living thriving for the last 9 years medication free, which I am not, and we'll get into this. I'm not saying anybody go and hop off your medication. This is just maybe a little preview of what's to come in our conversation. But my passion is mental health. And so my brand, my company is called Sparking Wholeness because I really do want to kind of set a spark in motion and help people to see that there's so much beyond just the traditional, take your meds and sleep some more, which is what I was told. There are so many things that can be contributing to your mental health crises. And there are so many evidence-based tools that we can use to help support that diagnosis and help even potentially reverse those symptoms to where you can live symptom-free like I am. And so that's going to look differently for everybody. There's no one size fits all, but I'm absolutely passionate about mental health, sharing my story, writing, speaking, teaching, gut health, gut-brain connection, all the fun things that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I was drawn to you when I found you on social media, actually the first time. And I can't remember how long I've been following you for now, probably when I started back in school, I'm gonna guess. But I also have a passion for those that struggle with any kind of depression, anxiety, anything mental health related, because I too struggled for the first, almost 50 years of my life. And I too was told to, they told me to eat eat healthy and just rest and take my medication.
Yeah.
And, no one ever told me, first of all, what eat healthy was or what that balanced diet was that I was supposed to get. But yeah, so I definitely have a passion for anybody who struggles with any kind of mental illness or brain health issues, really is what it really comes down to. Because when your brain is healthy, then your mind is going to be healthy. And so, yeah, I love the message that you have and you put out there all the time. And so, yeah, I think people can definitely benefit from hearing your story, especially like you said, that was another thing that you mentioned too, just now, that you identify as a bipolar survivor. And that was one of the things that I loved about you too, because I think that people have the habit of just sinking into their diagnosis.
Right.
And I'm 100% guilty. I used to do that as well. But yeah, I think I'm glad that you did not sink into your diagnosis as well. And you fought. It does take a fight to get out of whatever you're in. But yeah, I'm glad that you fought your way out, and now you identify as a survivor. So it's possible. I want people to realize that it is possible.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. I think that, in the world of diagnosing, I think that it can be really helpful because then there's a name to that thing that you're struggling with. It's not all in your head. It's not you going crazy. There's actually an illness to go along with the symptoms. And we like that because then it's like, okay, well, now maybe I can get some help. Now maybe I can get some relief. The problem is for a lot of people, and what we're seeing now, especially with the conventional treatment methods, is that they're not getting better. There are people, more and more people are medicated with antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication than ever before, but more and more people are struggling than ever before. And I have a really hard time with the conventional treatment methods if people aren't getting better. If it works, great. And medication can be an incredible tool for the people that it works for. My concern is for the people, and same thing with diagnoses, right? For the people who it's helpful for, great. But my concern is for the people who are still struggling. They've got the label, they've got the name tag slapped onto them, whether it's bipolar or depressed or anxious or OCD or AD. Right now, ADHD is having a moment, so let's just throw that in with everything else. And then maybe they have the meds, and maybe they're trying all the meds because they can't seem to find the one that works, and they still want more. My passion is for those because I consider them to be, in some ways, medically marginalized and, to use extreme phrasing, medically gaslit in a lot of cases, because when you're working so hard to find the solution that's going to give you relief and you don't find it, it makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, even more so than before you got the diagnosis. And so there's a real push and pull, and that I think more and more people are sounding the alarm about. And that's where my passion is okay, where can I find the ones who feel that they've been left behind and that the things aren't working, and how can I inspire them? And it can be just, through an Instagram post, through a podcast, through whatever. It doesn't have to be with a one-on-one health coaching session, but they're the ones that I want to encourage because I used to be that person.
So maybe you can give a little bit more of a detailed story about maybe how you were diagnosed, or what kind of symptoms you were first having, or what made you first seek to get that diagnosis. Because I think, like you said, sometimes that really does help to have a name. But unfortunately, a lot of people think that they're stuck with that name. And so hopefully they can realize too, like I said before, that they don't have to be stuck with that. And I love the fact that you want to help people, like I want to help people too, that want more. So maybe tell us a little bit more of your in-depth, detailed backstory.
Yeah. So when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, the first time I heard of it, it was actually called manic depressive illness to me, because they were still kind of using that phrasing, even though that's like way old fashioned, like maybe 1960s, back in the 1900s phrasing. Right. I was diagnosed in the fall of 1999. And so the way they described it to me is that I, met the symptom checklist of this disorder. And what had happened for me is I would have periods of extreme lows, because a lot of people, just to demystify what bipolar disorder even is, a lot of people mix it up with borderline personality disorder, two very different things. So bipolar disorder is a period of time of sinking depression, which I experienced quite a bit. And it's full body depression. It's, I can't get out of bed. I have zero energy. I can't even put my shoes on and go anywhere. It's just an overall blah feeling. That's what the depression side of bipolar is like. And it doesn't always manifest in suicidality for people. For me, it was like, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up for a really long time. Not until the sadness and this fatigue and this low motivation is away. And then I would have periods of heightened mood. And by heightened mood, it would be grandiosity. Like at one point, I told my counselor, oh, I could get through college in a day. No problem. I could totally get through college in a day. And I was a freshman in college when I said this. I just thought that it would be really easy for me. So this grandiose thinking that I could do so many things at once, racing thoughts, rapid speech. I'm a fast talker anyway, and I'm going to be talking fast through this whole thing. But this is like super speed. Like you go 1.5 times on a podcast, right? Like super fast. Bouncing around from one idea to the next, also kind of part of my personality, but this is an extreme way. It never manifested in irritability or anger or aggression for me. It was more of an elation. It was a very high mood where the world just looked better. It did come with some risky behavior, risk-taking behavior, which was not really the kind of kid that I was. I was a firstborn preacher's daughter. I did all the right things, checked all the boxes, went to church, went to a private Christian school from 4th grade till I graduated high school. And so risky behavior was not really something that was natural to me, but that manifested that at kind of the end of my senior year, beginning of my freshman year of college. And so after a period of time, and at the same time, I'll also add in, I think I stayed up for, that's another sign of the mania side of things. I stayed up for maybe 2 days in a row without sleeping while I also was diagnosed with mononucleosis. And so if anybody understands what mononucleosis is, that is a pretty debilitating virus where you're supposed to have really low energy and feel sick and sleep for a really long time. I stayed up for 2 days straight. So, and we can talk about this later, there is definitely a gut-brain immune connection. And I think that it was kind of an immune system on fire dynamic for me at that time that nobody ever looked into. Now, I mean, I can go down the research rabbit hole and there's some interesting connections with brain inflammation and immune system issues like something like mono. But that was all happening at the same time when I got my diagnosis. And so that I had already been taking antidepressants since my sophomore year of high school. So I had been on, I was first on Zoloft was the first thing they put me on. And that, there is some school of thought that if you have a family history of bipolar disorder, that the antidepressant medication might swing you up too high to stimulate a manic episode. And so because the medication did not really work for me and we kept adjusting the dosage up. And meanwhile, I gained 20 to 25 pounds somewhere in that. And that was very hard for me as an active athlete in high school. They thought that maybe the antidepressant contributed to the mania, but it's so hard to say. Like I said, it's a big jumble of, oh my gosh, what is the root cause? There could be 15 root causes when it comes to this bipolar disorder. But I know what I was experiencing at the time was I was meeting the criteria for a diagnosis based on the DSM, which is what they use to diagnose psychiatric conditions. So that's the best way to say it is I met the symptoms at the time. I have not met the criteria for the symptoms in a very long time, probably close to 15 years now. And I've been off medication for 9 years. So, so it's so hard to say what was really going on, but that at the time was what was presenting.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned the gut-brain axis too. And I know that hormones play a huge factor. Well, at least I think for me, when I was experiencing depression and anxiety, I had a lot of looking back. It's easy for me to look back and piece things together. But of course, I don't know for sure because I can't go back to myself and test my hormones and see what kind of things are going on. Or I can't do a stool test to see what was going on, in my gut to see. But I think a lot of those things definitely took a toll on my health too, as well as it played a huge role. And had we known then what we know now, or there've been more people like you and me out there, at least questioning things. I think that more people might be a little better off, but yeah, the gut-brain connection is really a huge one. And the gut health plays a huge role when it comes to just about anything when it comes to your health.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? If I wanted to back up my story way, way back to the beginning, I mean, I am a classic, probably, I heard a chiropractor phrase it as perfect storm of a baby. We were just talking about kids with mental health issues, kids with, because we have so many things going on with kids. And I kind of explained some of my medical history as a baby and as a child. And he's like, oh, that's a perfect storm. And so what that means is I struggled with chronic ear infections. I was colicky. I probably had mold exposure that created a whole bunch of symptoms early on. My mom tells me a story, and this is one of my earliest memories, but I was so little. I was probably not even 2, but my lungs collapsed 75%. And that was a pretty traumatic experience, but that just shows asthma symptoms, how those affected me. And so I struggled with asthma. I was on steroid medication and inhalers and rounds and rounds and rounds of antibiotics and strep infections and scarlet fever. And then, I witnessed the traumatic death of my grandpa when I was 9. And after that, I started struggling with stomach issues. No surprise there. I look back and I know this because I always wrote in a journal, even from a very young age. And so I can look back at journals from 5th grade, which was just months after I witnessed my grandpa's death. And you can see, I'm like, oh, I'm home again from school because my stomach hurts and I have diarrhea. And home again from school. And now I'm on antibiotics because of this. Just that trauma of that event sent my immune system into a spiral. And then that's what ultimately caused me to suffer from some PTSD symptoms in middle school. And then I was really experiencing some suicidality in 8th grade, 9th grade, which led me to get put on, I was on birth control first, of course, which probably decreased my B6 and my zinc and contributed to even more gut issues. And so, so it was a perfect storm for my brain to catch up and go, yeah, we're not doing this. And so I think, when I look back, I go, wow, well, of course, I had symptoms of bipolar disorder and depression because that was my brain protecting me. My body, my physical body was experiencing some very severe symptoms that were not getting caught. And so my brain, I think sometimes our brain is the last to catch up when it comes to physical issues like that. And that was the case for me. So that gut-brain connection absolutely factors into my story to this day. Even just this last year, I had a reemergence of I'm very public about this, reemergence of some trauma symptoms. And I did a gut test because I was like, okay, I got to check and see what's going on with my gut. And lo and behold, some of the commensal bacteria that we really want to be plentiful in our gut to create our neurotransmitters, they were low. And my secretory IgA, which is kind of like the immune protection in our gut lining that helps to create important barrier function so that we are not reacting to the world around us and having food sensitivities and sensitivities to mold and toxins and all of that. Well, my secretory IgA was really low. And so my body, even on a gut test, shows the level of depletion. And this has been going on my whole life, And so I think that's something I want to encourage for listeners who are hearing this. You are so much more than the label that you've been given because there are so many different contributing factors. And that's why there's no one size fits all solution. That's why there's no one size fits all root cause. But I do think that when we unravel the layers like an onion, I think it can be really helpful to go, okay, so what are the things that I need from my unique body to help make sure my brain knows that it's safe? Well, I know I need nutrients and I'm skipping ahead to what we can do. And we can,
that's okay.
I'll let you jump in at any point. But I mean, this has been so eye-opening for me in the last 10 years to go, what does my body need for healing? When I really tune into it and choose to partner with it. Because dissociation is a big part of my story. Who wants to be present for a body that they feel like is freaking out and against them? Whether you're struggling with autoimmune disease, whether you're struggling with mental health issues, whether you're struggling with IBS or whatever your issues are, it's really hard to want to partner with a body that you feel like is against you. And I felt that way for a really long time. And so I checked out. I didn't want to connect. And so it's been a really long journey of processing and reconnecting and trying, realizing this is the one vessel I have to live out my God-given purpose on this earth. I've got one. And this vessel holds things for me. And this vessel's protecting me, even if the symptoms are unpleasant. they're protective in some way. And so what can I do to help nourish and steward, if we want to use, Christian-y terms, steward what I've been given. So, so that is, sorry, I left a lot there on the plate for you.
That's okay. Well, and to partner along with some of what you said, if we bang our elbow, and it gets swollen and red and inflamed, that's a symptom, and it's our body telling us, okay, you did something to it. Maybe you don't remember banging your elbow, but you did something to it. There's a bruise there for a reason, and it's our body is telling us these things, but our gut can't always tell us, hello, you're missing some of this bacteria, or hello, you have way too much of this bacteria. Mm-hmm. It shows up in other symptoms, whether it's eczema or rosacea on the skin, to like you said, you're anxious a little bit more, or you're blue a little bit more, or our body. That's the way our body is communicating with us. And like you said, we have to really learn how to tune in and actually listen to it, and be open to accepting what it says, and think about, okay, is it something that I'm doing to contribute to it? Or is it the environment around me? Or like you said, are there triggers that are maybe causing some of these things as well? Do I need to work on some of those things? So the body is a beautiful and miraculous thing, and especially when you listen to it.
Yes. I mean, every single part of the body tells a story, and it's all connected. And I love that. And that's why the more I get into functional medicine and integrative health and really learning how these parts are interconnected, I see a beautiful design, and I see that this is not some stupid creation, right? Like, this is a masterful design of inner working parts where, the brain talks to the gut through the vagus nerve, but then we also know that most of the communication between the brain and the gut, about 90% of that signaling goes from the gut to the brain. And so our gut might actually be talking to our brain more than our brain talks to our gut. And that vagus nerve, that signaling in between, has to be nourished as well. We need good vagal tone. And the way I've heard it described is, what happens if you're on a trampoline and you're jumping on the trampoline and the springs are really loose and the netting isn't great underneath and you just kind of fall through. You don't want that. You want a bouncy trampoline. That's the vagus nerve. That's the connection between the gut and the brain. So we need to create resilience in our life. The problem is that we get depleted. And so we never are able to create that resilience. That communication gets out of whack. And so we miss the signaling, or the signaling just is not what it needs to be. And so we struggle, and then we're like, oh, what's wrong with me? It's something wrong with me. I just need to think more positive, or I need to, and if even from a spiritual standpoint, it's like, I just need to pray harder. I need to pray harder. Oh, I spent years thinking I just needed to pray harder. And then that made me get more and more bitter. And from a spiritual standpoint of going, okay, I'm really broken. There must be some reason that I'm not getting better. I can't even do the Christian thing right. And so we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when leaning in and going, okay, what are my symptoms telling me? What's going on? And, sometimes underneath that anxiety and underneath the symptoms, we do have trauma. We have nervous system dysregulation. We have a body that's been in fight or flight for a really long time. Or in my case, I was in freeze for a really long time. So what can I do to create calm, peaceful environment of healing instead of just constantly trying to beat myself up for not living up to my own expectations? So we beat our bodies up, not realizing that the more we do that, the worse it gets.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned nourishment a couple times. So maybe this will be a nice, simple question for people to really kind of something to grasp onto. What kinds of foods or drinks do you recommend that people be sure to either include or avoid? Because I have a couple that I like to recommend to clients and see. Well, first I try to go what they say, because sometimes they already know things that they should include or avoid. And then we start with that. And then I try to, especially if I suggest that they avoid for a little while at least, I say at least for a little while. I'm not saying you can never have whatever it is again. Just for a little while, give your body a chance to calm down. Let's see how you do without this or when we add this and see how it goes. So what kind of foods or drinks do you recommend that people either include or avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question, because usually I love employing the principle of addition over restriction. But I will say that a big part of my healing journey came from eliminating sodas. I was for so long a Diet Coke or a Coke Zero girl or a Diet Dr. Pepper. And then after the birth of my second child, I went to straight Coke, straight Dr. Pepper. Like, I just wanted all the sugar because I was like, I don't think those artificial sweeteners are good for me. So I'm just having the heavy duty real stuff. Right. But when I eliminated that was a game changer for, I think probably, and of course it's hard to tell. I don't know. I was in my early 30s, so I wasn't checking my blood sugar constantly. I didn't even know what that would be like, but I think that was a game changer for my blood sugar. And supporting blood sugar is really important for mental health, because oftentimes we can experience anxiety, but it's really a blood sugar regulation issue where our heart's beating, our head's going all crazy. And it may not be because of true anxiety due to, maybe like a reemerging trauma symptom or memory, or maybe like, you're about to go take a test or about to go give a presentation or whatever it is. Maybe it really is you just had too much sugar at lunch. Your blood sugar crashed and now you're a little shaky and it feels like anxiety. So I had no clue that the amount of sugar that I was consuming was impacting my mental health. And I was, because of, I think, the rounds of antibiotics and the yeast overgrowth that did cause for me time and time again, I needed sugar and carbs all the time. I was a teacher for 11 years, and I was a teacher that after lunchtime, I needed my sugar, I needed my sweet treat, I needed something, or I would fall asleep when my students were reading in class. It would just, and that tells me a lot about the state of my blood sugar fluctuation. So the very first thing is, I would say, sugar and sodas. Liquid sugar is probably the easiest thing to just straight up just cut it out. And then as I went through my journey, one of the things that really has popped out in the research for me again and again is gluten. When it comes to mental health, there are, and if you don't believe me, go to PubMed and just do a search on gluten in mental health, or gluten in IBS, or gluten in schizophrenia, or gluten in bipolar disorder, or whatever. You will see there are plenty of articles. And there are a lot of reasons, but one reason could be that gluten increases enhanced intestinal permeability for just about everybody who consumes it. The degree to which it increases it, and that's another word for the kind of the phrase leaky gut that gets thrown around a lot. But the degree varies, but for all people, that can be an issue. For some people, a gluten intolerance can manifest in psychiatric issues, not necessarily digestive issues. And I often wonder, because I have been, it'll be almost 7 years gluten-free for me. And I'll have it, every once in a while, holidays, because I'm not celiac, I don't have a true gluten allergy. I'll have it here and there for some reason, holiday event or something, special event, something like that. And then I remember, oh yeah, this doesn't make me feel good. It gives me brain fog. And so I really had no clue that for me, I had issues with gluten. Of course, looking at the state of my gut, it's like, yeah, that's probably helpful to take it out. So that was a big one for me. For a while, I was dairy free as well. And there's another school of thought with gluten and dairy, is that gluten contains a compound called gluteomorphin, the root word there being morphine, and dairy contains casomorphin, again, root word being morphine, to where some people can feel more susceptible to how it activates the opiate receptors in the body. And so, of course, we're going to feel real good when we have pizza, because it's just got the perfect amount of gluten and dairy, and it can elicit a drug-like effect for some people. Not all people are going to be as susceptible to that. I do think, I always joked back in my yo-yo dieting days, I joked that pizza was my gateway drug, because if I had pizza, I could not stop. There was something about that combination for me. I could not stop eating it. And so I wonder, so I was dairy free for a little while. Right now, I'm currently dairy free at the moment, but I had kind of added it back into my diet as far as, organic grass-fed forms. So let's see. So sugar, sweets, gluten, dairy, those were big ones for me. I am a really big fan of adding in things like grass-fed red meat and animal protein that's high quality, because I didn't for a long time. And I know for so many people, that's such a great way to get iron, to get bioavailable vitamins, minerals like iron, zinc, selenium. I mean, the list is boundless as far as the nutrients that are available in animal proteins. And so I'm really big on that. Of course, I'm really big also on vegetables because we need that prebiotic fiber to feed the gut microbiome and to bring in the diversity so that our gut can thrive. So I'm big on that. Those are the things that I'm always going to discuss adding in, and especially depending on, hormone factors as well. I'm really encouraging these days people to limit, if they can, alcohol consumption. Sober Curious is really hot right now because I think for a while everybody got kind of into this like, red wine is healthy for you because resveratrol and all of these things. And now we're seeing the studies tell us that there's no safe use of alcohol. And it does break down the microbiome in a similar way, or in the gut lining in a similar way that gluten does, and can decrease microbial diversity. And if you think about it, I mean, alcohol is used to clean wounds. Like, do I really want to douse my gut in something that's going to sterilize it? No, I don't. So that's another thing that I really encourage right now. And I know that's hard because socially it is so acceptable right now to have cocktails. And even my husband and I, we were at dinner the other night and we saw people starting their dinners off with shots, like adults, like people over 50, starting their night out with shots of tequila or shots of, what were they? I don't even know what it was, but I was just kind of like, oh, well, this is where we are as a society. And I think COVID did that to a lot of us because we stayed home and it was like, well, guess we can do happy hour now. But I am encouraging that as well. So that's sorry, I probably went on for a little bit, but so sugar, sodas, reducing that, gluten, dairy could be potential triggers for people, adding in a lot of protein, adding in a lot of vegetables, and then definitely reducing or limiting or quitting alcohol could be a really helpful option for mental health.
Well, and I found that once I started doing all of those things as well, especially once I started increasing, yes, my red meat for sure, but once I started eating more protein in general, and then once I started eating fruits and vegetables and things like that, that naturally just crowded out some of the things that I tried to get rid of. And it definitely helped me get rid of the soda as well. And the soda was a game changer. My blood sugars were very unstable. I also, now looking back, it was clearly obvious how a lot of my health conditions were blood sugar related. And the gluten, hands down, is like one of my number one things I try to, suggest to people, because I also then, before my husband and I had totally switched our diets, he was diagnosed with diabetes. And that's when I was like, well, right before then I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And I had already started some of the things in my health journey, but not everything. I was down to like 1 can of soda a day, and I wasn't eating candy, but I was still eating cookies. Yep. And, I mean, hey, it was baby steps, right? But once I finally cut all that out, I suddenly had no rheumatoid arthritis also, on top of the fact my mental health was a million times better. I literally had no joint pain, no aches, no nothing. So that's one of the things I really try to impress upon people if they can. I mean, because by the time you give it up for 3 months, let's say, you're going to be so much farther ahead. You're not going to want to really go back, and you're going to find out, oh, I don't really miss eating bread at every meal anymore.
Yes, and that's huge. Okay, the bread thing is hard for a lot of people. And I'm the person who, I was a bread girl for life. Like as a little kid, one of my favorite things, I would have white bread and butter as a sandwich, and I mean, if you asked, I just think about, I was such a picky eater, probably having to do with a lot of my health issues, to maybe a lack of zinc. I don't know. I mean, there's so much going on, but bread was my go-to all the time. And so for me because I'm not going to eat gluten-free bread. I think it's gross, number one. And number two, I don't think the ingredients are really that much better than what we get in regular bread. Every once in a while, and that's when I say that if I do include gluten, I did find at Costco recently, of all things, they have an organic sourdough that's just 4 ingredients. I don't even know name. I'm not affiliated with them at all. I wish I was affiliated with Costco because I love Costco, but I was thrilled. And I was able to try that over. That was kind of a December fun thing that we had, was we had some sourdough, but all to say, I loved bread, and now I really don't miss it. I've just found other alternatives. And, I'm in the South. We eat chips and salsa. So I eat chips for a lot of things, like the siete chips, especially. I'm a big fan of those. I'm okay with, especially if I can find organic corn tortilla chips, I'm okay with that. And that way I can get like that carby feeling if I want a snack like that. But the bread thing is not an issue anymore. It's very strange. And I do think it's because I've just switched my cravings so much because of all, like you mentioned, adding in all of those other beneficial nutrients.
Yeah. And so are there any misconceptions about bipolar disorder that you want to clarify from your own experience? Because hopefully by now at this point, some people are getting a little sense of hope, or maybe just start to take some own self-inventory about maybe things that they can do to start small. But are there any kind of misconceptions about bipolar that you want to address, or just from your own experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that it's something they're always going to struggle with, and they might. There might be some people that always struggle with symptoms. I was told that, you have this, you're going to struggle with this for the rest of your life. You're going to have to be on medication for the rest of your life. I was told that it's just like, a diabetic needing insulin. So it's like your insulin pump, just take your medication. And I was like, okay, cool. And I did. And I was very dutiful about taking my medication, even though so many of the medications I was given had caused really extreme negative side effects for me. But I took them because I didn't want to struggle. I did not want to be unwell. And so I have so much, not sympathy, I have empathy, because I know I have so much empathy for somebody who is doing all the things and still struggling. I was taking all of the meds. I was trying to sleep. I was trying to manage my time, do all these things that they said, and move my body, but I couldn't. And it just wasn't working for me. And so I think that, like I said at the beginning, while medications can be a great tool for some people, maybe there's something else. And there are so many other things that we're seeing to be helpful, like just the concept of nutritional psychiatry. And there's, the doctor, what is his name? Dr. Chris Palmer, I believe. He's a psychiatrist who's treating people with bipolar disorder using the ketogenic diet. And I ate pretty keto-ish, I will say, for a few years, and it was really helpful for me. But I found true ketogenic diet to be very limiting, especially if you're social like I am. I like to go out and hang out with people, and I really don't want to be that person that's like, I'm on keto, because nobody's going to understand that it's for a therapeutic reason. Everybody just thinks of keto as being a trend and a diet, but it was actually developed for oh my gosh, my brain just epilepsy. It was developed as an epilepsy treatment. And one of the reasons I think it's so fascinating that it's working for bipolar disorder is that many bipolar disorder patients are treated with anti-epileptics. And so, I think if the treatment works if the diet, the ketogenic diet works so well for epilepsy, then maybe, and epileptic medications work well for bipolar disorder, then maybe that's why it's so successful for bipolar disorder. But all to say, it's not, even if your parents have bipolar disorder and they say that there's a strong genetic factor there, maybe, but we also know about epigenetics. And that is the concept that genes load the gun, our environment pulls the trigger. Your environment will always be stronger than your genetic expression. So the toxins you're exposed to, the food that you're consuming, and by toxins, what toxins are you consuming even with your thought life? Those can be toxins. Mm-hmm. The exercise is so big for me. We know now there's a huge meta-analysis done, I think it was last spring, that exercise has proven to be 1.5 times more effective than talk therapy or medication for depression and anxiety. And I think that's huge. So I exercise. And when I say exercise, I'll say I move my body. I move my body intentionally every day because I feel like it just works everything out. And so whether that is slow movement, it's a walk, it's strength training, I have to move my body somehow every day because it truly helps my brain feel regulated. So that's a big one. So As far as misconceptions go, yeah, there are so many tools and treatments that we can use to help support the root cause. I think there's a misconception, I've seen people post like, don't ask questions, trust your doctors, or don't ask question about what caused this because we never know. I'm like, wow. That feels so limiting. And maybe some people, depending on where you are in the journey, maybe that works for you. I think there was a time in my life, maybe a good 5 to 8 years, where I was like, I'm feeling okay. I'm just going to take my meds. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm just going to do the thing that I'm doing and try to have a routine in my life, not shake anything up because I just want to be normal. And that's what I think a lot of people who are struggling with something like bipolar disorder, that's the feelings. I just want to be like everybody else. I just want to be normal, quote, air quotes, like everybody else. So, so I think the misconceptions that you're always going to struggle, you're always going to need meds. It's genetic. There's no workaround. I think there's also a misconception that you must be diagnosed to struggle with these things. And that's not true. I mean, you look at how we diagnose disorders, they're based on a list of symptoms. I remember one time my husband, who is a counselor, he's a therapist, he looked at the checklist of symptoms for bipolar disorder. This was a few years ago. And he's like, well, gosh, I could meet this list of symptoms depending on what kind of day I had. And so even the way that we diagnose, just remember, there's no lab work that diagnoses you with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, ADHD. Nobody is actually looking at your brain unless you go to the Amen clinic somewhere like with Dr. Daniel Amen, who is doing the work to look at people's brains. But even the way we diagnose these disorders is based on somebody telling you what they think your symptoms are presenting as. I've talked to people who have been gone to 4 different experts and been diagnosed with 4 different things because it is based on a checklist and nobody's looking at labs to go, yep, if you're deficient in this, you definitely have bipolar disorder. It doesn't work that way. So I think that the conversations need to change because I think the way we've been doing things just aren't working as well as maybe they were intended to be when some of the modern solutions came out.
Since you mentioned the Amen clinics, I recently on March 23rd, I had Dr. Easton from the Amen clinics, and that's when his episode aired. And so we had a nice conversation. We actually talked about bipolar disorder as well.
Oh, nice.
We talked about the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 because a lot of people I think if somebody with one of them, you just associate that as bipolar. You don't realize that there's a couple different types of bipolar disorder. And, but yeah, we had a nice conversation about that. And, we also talked about the SPECT scan too. And that's one of the things that I love about Amen clinics. When I heard Dr. Amen talk a couple of years ago, about how, he got into this and his dad laughed at him because, he wanted to actually look at the brains. It's like, that he was like the only one that actually looked at the organ he's treating,
right.
And I thought when I first heard that, I thought it screams so obvious. I can't believe all those years that I was seeking help, no one ever once thought to actually look at it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up the differences between bipolar 1, bipolar 2. And I think that there's even like a mixed, I don't know if you talked about that too, where it's a mixed moods state. When I was diagnosed, I have no clue which one I was because they didn't even talk about it. This was so long ago. This is in the 1900s. It was so long ago that I don't think that they were putting it into those categories. And so my was probably more, I think is it 2, where it's more heavy on the depression side of things?
Yes.
It's not too much mania, more of a hypomania is more how things manifested for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the tricky thing too, because again, like he even commented and you said too, I don't think people really realize that doctors use an actual checklist and there's books and things that they actually literally check off to figure out, okay, you meet this criteria because you've checked this many boxes and this is now your diagnosis. So
right. I mean, and anybody could, it's like we live in an era of diagnosing ourselves. If you think about, like, I've recently followed a lot of, because ADHD is just blowing up. And I do think, I talked to an ADHD expert on my podcast once, and she's like, a lot of women are misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder, but really they just had ADHD. But back in the day, ADHD meant fidgety, it meant moving around all the time. It didn't necessarily account for mental fidgeting. And so this particular ADHD expert was like, I kind of think that maybe you were misdiagnosed. And I thought, oh my gosh. So that was like such a light bulb moment for me that I've just gone down the ADHD rabbit hole. And of course I can diagnose myself with ADHD. Who can't in this era of notifications and overscheduling and, always having a phone in front of our faces, that we have no away message on our emails anymore, right? Like, because everybody knows we can just check them all the time. Anyway, all to say, we do live in this world where you can diagnose yourself with just about anything by using Google. And I think that, for some of us that can be helpful. Like I said at the very beginning, it can be helpful because it's like, I feel seen. It's, it's not just, there's really something special going on with my brain. It's not just me thinking I'm crazy, right? And so it can be helpful, but there's just so much information that sometimes it can be harmful. And I think that's why it is important to see an expert and to see somebody who specializes in that disorder, or in that, I say disorder, I don't love the word disorder, but in that specific diagnosis, or to find somebody who's trained in integrative health or functional medicine, who really will go, wait a minute, let's look at your symptoms and let's dive a little bit deeper and see what's driving the symptoms. That, I think, is really what has been most helpful for me. And I think that's where a lot of people are finding relief right now.
Yeah, I know that before you mentioned movement. You like to move your body every day, which I go to the gym 4 times a week, but that's because I know that if I physically don't go there, I won't.
Right.
I can't just say, I'm just going to work out at home, or I'll do something at home, because I know that I won't. Mm-hmm. So I physically have to, I know me, and I physically have to go there. But are there any kind of activities or hobbies, or since you mentioned the internet, is also full of good information and bad information, are there any kind of resources like books or websites that maybe you find particularly helpful that maybe you want to recommend or mention people maybe take a look at?
Yeah, I mean, I love, like I said, I've said this a few times, love functional medicine. I love that there are so many different functional medicine experts out there who are bringing attention to these root cause issues. And so, one organization that I follow is Rupa Health, RUPA. They put out a lot of great information. School of Applied Functional Medicine is where I got my functional medicine training. They have a great social media with good little tidbits here and there. That's really helpful. I'm trying to, of course, I also went to Institute for Integrative Nutrition, so I follow them. They have really great information as well. I can't remember what the actual social media is, but as far as books, some of my most recent favorites that I have been recommending to people, number one, Try Softer by Andy Kolber. It's a really incredible look at just nervous system regulation, and it is faith-based perspective. It does have a scriptural basis to it for people who are interested in that, but it's a great overview. The other book that I recommend to a lot of people is called The Slowdown Diet by Mark David, M-A-R-C David. And it's great because it really helps you to understand. One of the things that I always say is a body in stress won't digest. And it really breaks that down about how the way that we eat might be more impactful than what we eat, and how slowing down and looking at the nutrients and the colors and the smells and taking time to digest and breathing, praying before a meal, all of these things that are just practices of eating hygiene we don't do in our rush, to the next appointment culture. We're always rushing. We're always going. We're eating in our car. We're eating fast food. We're eating standing up. And the slow down diet is a huge one if you want to just transform the way that you eat to improve your overall health. So those are the 2 top ones that come to mind. I mean, if I'm looking around in my office right now, I recently picked up for research because I have a book that will be coming out probably in spring of 2025, which I'm really excited about. So of course I'm going to give a shout out for my book because I think that's just going to be a really holistic overview of the mind, body, spirit connection. But one of the books I read for research for that is called The Joy of Movement. And it's a fascinating read, just talking about the benefits. Because most people, when they think about moving their body, they think about it for body modification or to lose weight or to fit better in their clothes. And maybe that might be the case for some people, but the benefits of movement go so far beyond that. So I'm trying to see if I'm forgetting anything. Those are I would say those are my main recommendations.
Well, and I do know of somebody that experiences bipolar as well. And so I've never experienced bipolar, but I, again, had depression and anxiety. Again, I also am on no medication after being on it for a lot of years. And I'm talking a lot of years. I'm going to say like 20 years.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah. And it was a long journey to get off of the medication because, anytime you're on any medication, whether it's depression and anxiety or, just something as simple, air quotes, simple as CBD, there's the rebound effect when you come off of a medication. So I made sure to take a long time to get off of those medications.
Wow.
And then I think that it took a couple years until even after the fact that I think I still had some of the side effects from some of those medications.
Yeah, it does take a little while.
Yeah. And so, what kind of silver linings do you, or positive lessons did you learn from having, or the struggles that you had? I know for me, I get to tell people now and help them see their potential. So what would you see as maybe some silver linings that maybe you experienced for struggling with bipolar depression?
I think for so long I operated under the mentality, pun intended, that my brain was broken, that my mental health was deteriorating, and that I had to take medication to boost whatever neurotransmitters were imbalanced, whatever chemicals were imbalanced. And that theory now, a good psychiatrist will tell you that theory is just a theory and doesn't necessarily incorporate what's going on with a brain that's suffering from depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder. It's way more complex than that. And when we call it a chemical imbalance, we're simplifying things because it's so much more complex than that. And maybe it doesn't have to do with one neurotransmitter, but I just thought, well, here it is. This is what's happening. And this is all I have to offer. And I limited myself with my diagnosis. I limited, in some ways, even my future and my potential, because I just thought that maybe I had to live in a smaller box than I originally wanted to live in. And I know that might sound really weird, but when I was growing up, I had so many dreams and hopes and things I wanted to do. I wanted to write. Being a writer was my number one goal from the time I was a very little girl. And I just kind of put that to the side because I was like, well, nobody's going to want to hear anybody write about mental illness. I'm too crazy to share my story. Nobody, it's like I developed limiting beliefs to match the limitations of my label. And so I think the silver lining is through this process, through restoring my health, it's caused me to restore just my view of myself and my purpose to where I can go, wait a minute. No, I switched and shifted careers from teaching middle school to in a public school setting to now health coaching and podcasting and writing. And I love it. I feel like now I'm living and thriving in a way that I always dreamed, but I didn't know was possible. And so I would say maybe, and for anybody who's listening who feels limited by the label, by the diagnosis, by maybe your self-labeling and, however you've diagnosed yourself based on maybe trauma or any early life experiences that have really given you what you feel like to be a step back from your potential, that there's so much hope. And the limitations sometimes, unfortunately, are perceived reality for you. They're not necessarily reality. And I think for me, I was living under perceived threats for so long and perceived lies. And it still takes steps and steps to unravel those lives, but there is hope and there is healing. And, it takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of checking in and a lot of being vigilant with things like food, exercise. I didn't mention sleep and relaxation, and choosing to intentionally just slow down. That's a big part of it too. But I've just found hope for myself, hope for my kids. I'm not fearful that my kids are going to struggle like I did, because I know that there are so many tools that can help them.
Well, and I would imagine that, especially because you've lived it, I can see symptoms in some people, much easier, much like when you're sick with a cold, you can, if you've just literally just had that cold, you can see some of the symptoms that maybe somebody else is going through that you think, okay, they're going to be experiencing some of these things as well. So I would imagine that you have a good sense of, some triggers or some symptoms that somebody could possibly be experiencing, especially in your family, so that's wonderful too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I had my daughter, and that's a whole sidebar conversation, but I got pregnant with my daughter my senior year of college, definitely unplanned, I was not married. I was not even in a relationship. It was not a good period of my life. But when I had her, I remember feeling terrified, like, oh no, what if she got the gene? What if she got the bipolar gene? And being afraid of that, like this is just going to keep getting passed down or something. When now I don't fear my daughter. Now she's, if I can give a shout out to her, she's 19. She's going to graduate from college at 20 with a double major in English and psychology. She's brilliant. She's grounded. She wants to be a clinical psychologist and help trauma survivors. She's the biggest blessing of my life. She saved my life. And I was a single mom for 4 years before I met my husband, and he adopted her, and we have 2 other kids together. But yeah, I thought, oh, well, this is it. One of my kids is going to be like me. And now I'm like, you know what? I see little things in my children that's so uniquely them. But if I see mood symptoms, I know, let's talk about what's going on in your body. Let's talk about what's going on in your brain. It's a whole different conversation than they need to go see a psychiatrist,
Yeah. Well, and especially if being the mom, I wish I would have known then again what I know now, but I could have, maybe change something in my kid's diet, or, that maybe could easily, because, as a mom, you have more control of that. Well, up until a certain age anyways.
Right.
And even then you don't have control, but we like to think we have some control, but at least you can still be in somewhat control and build some of those ideas with your kids that this is why we do things, or this is why we don't do certain things. That will carry over.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot of empowerment in that as well. Yeah.
Well, one thing I like to ask my guests before they leave is for their don't miss this moment. It would be, if you wanted the listener to have one thing that they take away from this conversation, what would that don't miss this moment be?
I would say your body is the vessel that you've been given to live your purpose on this earth. And your body is a crucial part of who you are. Your body is how you show up in the world. And so don't discredit it. Tune into it. Don't check out from it. As women, many of us, we grow up believing our body is an enemy. It's not a safe place for various reasons. And I think when we can choose to engage those, 3 parts, the body, mind, and spirit, in an interconnected way, it can really help to incorporate wholeness and help put us on a journey, really, of understanding, just having a better view of what our purpose is, and having a better view of how to live out this life in gratitude and hope, and from a place of abundance instead of a place of depletion.
Perfectly said. So where can the listeners find you and follow you, and possibly get your books next year?
Yes, I know. Next year, please follow me so you can get book updates. But I do send out monthly emails. I need to grow my email list. for book purposes. So I encourage you to sign. If you go to my website, sparkingwholeness.com, I have loads of freebies that will link you to my email list. I've got high protein recipes. I have I think I have a kid's lunch ideas on there. I've got a devotional ebook that's 7 Days to a Sound Mind. Got lots of stuff on there. Instagram, Sparking Wholeness, and then Facebook is Sparking Wholeness Integrative Nutrition. And that's all the social media that my brain can handle.
Well, thank you again so much for being on today, Erin. I really appreciate you taking the time to enlighten not just myself, but all the listeners as well.
Yes, thanks for having me on. I was looking forward to it, and it was just nice to chat with you and get to know you.
Are you looking for a good probiotic? Seed DS1 Daily Synbiotic has both prebiotic and probiotic. It supports digestive health, heart health, skin health, and gut health, including those who suffer with IBS. Their products are clinically studied and third-party tested for quality, and I think you'll be impressed with their eco-friendly packaging. Click the link in the show notes and use my code FORGIVEN for 15% off your first month supply. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and spirit, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use. Or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals with your current healthcare provider. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.